I am Abram Kielsmeyer Jones, and this is Accordance Commentary Survey. I offer this session once a quarter or so, and so we are due to do it again. We're doing it today. We're going to look at some commentary categories in general. Of course, this arrangement is somewhat subjective, and there's some overlap, so don't want to take this too rigidly, but we're going to look at different kinds of commentaries for different purposes. And I'll talk all along about how you might consider building a long-term commentary library and thinking through that. So that's one aspect of today. And we're also going to look at specific commentaries within each category, so you can get a sense, for example, of what commentaries there are that help you with exegesis of the original language. And all of this in Accordance. So I'll be using Accordance itself to demo these. I'll also talk about how to use the commentaries via the different search fields. This handout that you see on my screen is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. So just go to the handout section, make sure the triangle is pointed down, and click this open. If you registered, you'll also get this in an email follow-up along with a copy of the recording, because we are recording today. If you're watching this not live later on, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com. That's right here at the bottom of the screen, abramkj@accordancebible.com, and I'd be happy to pass this on to you. And then as time permits, and we may do this kind of along the way too, but we're going to look at what commentary use in action looks like for a single verse, and how you might use the different kinds of commentaries to do different sorts of research on that verse. If you've got questions or comments at any time, you can type them into the questions box, and I'll keep an eye on that and respond there as we go. Let's start by talking about a general one-volume commentary. And the idea here is that we get some commentary or two or three or four that cover every book of the Bible. That way we know that whatever passage we're in, there's going to be something for that passage, or at least the surrounding passages. It may not be super in-depth just because of the scope of the commentary, but it will give us broad coverage. So I don't need to be concerned if I'm preaching about a certain book and, oh, I don't have any commentaries on that book. Well, the one-volume commentary will have something on that book. Here are two of them that I want to highlight: Erdman's and the New Bible Commentary. And there are links to all of these in your handout. Just click on the highlighted portion and you'll go to that product page in the store. Let's look at Erdman's. And you can see here by clicking on the info button, this was published in 2000. I'm going to double click this open from the library. I'm sorry, that's the dictionary. That's not what I want. I want the commentary. 2003, it was published by Erdman's. So if I go to the content sidebar right here, I can get a sense of what's in here. And this is true of any tool in Accordance. You're going to see this little icon here. And if you're not sure what an icon does, just hover over it and you'll get some information on what that thing does. And in this case, it shows the table of contents, which is great. I don't even have to scroll up to them. I've got it right here. And this is all kind of nested. You've got a little bit of a hierarchy here, as you can see, and these are the disclosure triangles. Just like you can expand and collapse them in other apps, or even in the GoToWebinar control panel to get today's handout, you can do that to get varying level of detail here. So you can see this is broadly split up into contents. Of course, you've got your table of contents that way too, so you could look at it there. A preface, that's going to tell you what kind of commentary this is. It will say what I said, that it's a one-volume commentary, that it's trying to approach the passage in these certain ways, that it's got these limitations. It's going to note that it's the only one-volume Bible commentary, at least it was at the time of publishing, to cover all the texts regarded by one or more Christian churches as canonical. So that means if you are Catholic or Orthodox and you want to see the intertestamental literature, you'll see it treated here. And in fact, that's borne out here with Old Testament Apocrypha, New Testament, and then you've got the index here. Contributors will tell you who they are and where they're from and what book they've done. Abbreviations, these are all hyperlinked throughout the commentary, but they're here for reference. And then let's go to the Old Testament, for example. You'll see here not Genesis first, but some introductory articles. So this is a really good orienting tool, because before you even get into Genesis 1:1, you're going to have some introductory articles that will cover things like archaeology, pre-modern history, how do we think about this. There's also going to be an introduction for each book, and in this case, you get an introduction for the whole of the Pentateuch, talking about the first 5 books of the Bible as a unified whole and their composition. Well, let's get a sense of what kind of coverage is here. Let's go to Genesis. I've got an introduction, as I would hope. I've got some notes on interpretation, how it's arranged. Everything in here is hyperlinked. So this arrangement is giving me a sort of outline, and Gordon Wenham, who is the contributor here, talks about how each of the 10 sections in Genesis is headed by the title, "These are the descendants of." And maybe I never noticed that before, and I'd like to see that quickly. I could just search this phrase in a Bible, but I've also got it all mentioned here. Unlike a print text or even another kind of ebook, I don't have to look these up. I can just hover over each of them and see them in my instant details, which is down here. Now you may see a little bit of a wording difference depending on what translation is showing down here. I could change that translation at any time in my settings. If I went to instant details, I'm sorry, that's not where it is. It's under, let's see, it's going to be under tools. Yeah, let me come back to that in just a moment. So that's going to give me, I'm sorry, but I don't know why I'm blanking on that. Tool. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Anyway, you can change that in the instant details, what's actually showing there. But at any rate, you may see a phrase here, "These are the descendants of," that doesn't match exactly. This is the account of, but you can see anything that's mentioned here, that's referenced here. So here's 2:4, here's chapters 2 through 4. I mean, if you want to read all of that, you'll get a scrollable popover. You could even click it open into a new tab. So as you're browsing through the beginning of a commentary, you can see the hyperlinks right away. You'll get things like themes, and let's jump ahead just to the commentary itself. In this particular commentary, and we may need to drag this open a little bit, we've got some headings and then references. So the descendants of Adam, for example, Noah and the flood, and then here's a reference, and we could see now passage by passage how this is treated. And this is pretty instructive, I think, pretty indicative of what this commentary is like. We get just an opening sentence on this one passage. We get some background on Noah in 6:9, and then we just get a short paragraph on 3 verses and a short paragraph on 4 verses here and a passage here. So this is not a commentary that you would use for detailed exegetical work necessarily. It may still help you, but it's going to treat the passage as a whole. And you know that no matter what you go to, you're going to find something here. Maybe you want to look at how Noah is referenced in the New Testament. Well, you can even search your English content here for the word Noah and jump ahead to, you've got 70 hits here, but you can expand by hit, and you're going to see them all through Genesis. You can see I'm just hitting the hit key here, and it's advancing here by contents. But eventually I'm going to see Noah in Isaiah, in Ezekiel, Old Testament Apocrypha, and here in the New Testament. So here's Noah mentioned in Matthew. This is one of the advantages to these commentaries. This will be true of all of the commentaries we look at today, that you can search them in addition to just browsing them. So if you want to search by content, you can do that, as I've done here. And this is a fairly frequent way I find myself using this. I might be reading about Noah's story, and I might wonder, where is that in the New Testament? Of course, I could just open up a Bible text and search for Noah. This might even be quicker, and add a range. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Bear with me. Noah, range, Matthew through Revelation. And here he is in Matthew 24:37, Luke 3:36, and so on. So I might even, this might be quicker, go to add parallel and open up my Erdman's commentary in parallel. This is another way you can use the commentary. So I've got it here open on its own as a searchable commentary. Maybe now I go back to where I was in Genesis. I want to go back to Noah and the flood. I can even close the content sidebar, read through this here. Let's say this is my grounding passage, my base passage. And in this other tab, I've searched for Noah throughout the New Testament. I've opened Erdman's in parallel with it, so that when I scroll through these hits, and I'm going to scroll now, the commentary advances automatically. Now you'll see here there may not be an exact verse on verse 36, but it will show you the passage that's there. So I'm scrolling through here. Here's Noah in Hebrews. Here's Noah in 1 Peter. He comes up in a number of New Testament passages, and all of them I can have the commentary open at the side here. That's the Erdman's commentary. The IVP commentary is similar in scope. It's called the New Bible Commentary. It will not have the apocryphal books. This was published in, 1994 is the most recent copyright we get here. It functions the same way in that I've got the content sidebar here. So this should look familiar. We just saw this. Whenever I get a new module in Accordance, I generally just open the content sidebar and browse through. I'll click some of these like, ooh, approaching the Bible, that looks interesting. And I would like to know, how do these commentators approach the Bible? It may be very similar to how I do. It may be different. I may want similar. I may want different. I may want all approaches. So I can click that open and see, here's their section on how to interpret the Bible. And what I think you can expect from most commentaries is that, generally speaking, you're going to find in most prefaces, they're going to own their commitments and their presuppositions. I think many commentators will say, I'm trying to do this in an unbiased way. Others won't, because they're not trying to. But they'll at least tell you. So they'll say, I'm approaching this from the standpoint of believing this about how the Bible was inspired, or this is how the editors generally think about divine inspiration and human authorship. And in a multi-volume contributor, you'll probably get maybe some kind of a range, but all of that will be treated here, and you'll get an idea of that. And then same as before, you've got Genesis, introduction, authorship, themes, all that stuff you would expect. And then you can see here, in this case, we've got a nice and neat outline here that frames the commentary. So you can even, just in the content sidebar, get an outline of the book. This is how they outline the book. And then you can click through the different details here. Again, all the hyperlinks are here, and you can make your way through this commentary. Note the similarity in scope here with the New Bible Commentary to the Erdman's commentary. It's not a whole ton of detail on any given verse. You may get some detail on certain themes, but this is pretty typical that you get just this much comment on verses 1 through 8. Whereas a more detailed commentary, which we're going to swing far the other way next, a more detailed commentary will have this much, maybe on a phrase or two in one verse. But this is a good base, I think, to start with, these one-volume commentaries, because you know that you've got the coverage. The IVP commentary does not have the intertestamental books. It's just going to go straight from Malachi to Matthew, although it does have some articles about this apocryphal literature. So even if it doesn't have a commentary per se, it at least talks about it and summarizes it. So that's helpful. It covers a lot of territory there. So those are one-volume commentaries. Those are two that I like. Their interpretive lenses are different enough that I like to go to each and see how they deal with the text, and of course they're multi-author commentaries, so you'll get some variety just on that basis alone. But let's pause there, and I want to check in with you and see comments or questions you have before we move on to what I'm calling technical commentaries. And I'm going to find my way to where in the instant details, it's under tool display. No, it's not, it's text. I'll get there. Text display, it should be there. Anyway, the brain is working a little more slowly today as to why I can't find the hyper. Yeah, here it is. It's under tool display right here. I had it right the first time. All right, so hypertext, text, that's where you want to go. So you'll notice that, like I was in Genesis, let's go back to Erdmann's. And this is something to think about if you're using a commentary a lot. I was in Erdmann's and in the introduction to Genesis, and I've got the where he's talking about these are the accounts of, and it wasn't quite matching word for word, and that's because I had the NIT or the NET. It might be interesting to see what version is used here. You could even search that and see if you can find it. New Revised Standard Version. All right, so what I might do when using the Erdmann's commentary then is go to Settings and Tool Display and go to Hypertext and change that to the NRSV. Now I click on OK. I want to apply it to Open Tools. Yes. So now when I get to somewhere that's got the arrangement, these are the descendants of, let's go to 2:4. These are the generations of. All right, well, close enough. It's not an exact match, but you're seeing more matching then. Here we go. These are the descendants of, these are the descendants of. So if I had been surprised at seeing this phrase here and not seeing it in my instant details, just consider that most commentaries have a single base text that they're using. And here he even notes some translational differences here with generation. So all of this now is matching what I'm seeing in the instant details because it's the NRSV. So that's just a little thing, but you can change that and then also change it back if you want to under Settings, Tool Display, Hypertext. As we move to technical commentaries, which we'll do in just a moment, we'll see that most of these commentaries use their own translation. And they have footnotes on their translation decisions, which really gives you, I mean, it's the kind of other end of this more generalized set of comments. It gets really detailed because you've got the translator or the commentator translating the text and telling you why they translated it certain ways. So they may still refer to the NRSV or the NIV, but more likely than not, they're doing their own translation. So we'll move to that next, but I want to see what questions you've got. Somebody says NIV application on commentary, NIV application commentary on sale now. Thoughts? Yeah, I use that. I would probably put that under, well, that's an interesting commentary. It actually covers a lot of these bases, I think. And that's why I say these categories, I don't want to use them too rigidly. It is, in fact, what it says, an application commentary. But it does more than just application. It's pretty detailed in its original context, exegesis, and things like that. So the way that I would decide on a commentary like this is I would go to the product page where you can see usually something like the series introduction and get an idea of what they do. But this one notes that yes, it is an application commentary, it's in the name, but it starts by explaining the original meaning of the passage. And then it does the contemporary significance. So actually we've got original meaning, bridging contexts, and contemporary significance. And it's making the note that most commentaries just do the original meaning, nothing with what does it mean today or not as much. And that's fine. I mean, you can consider that if fair criticism or an unfair criticism. We don't want to critique a book based on what it's not even trying to do, or maybe we do. But this one is saying we're going to look at the original meaning, bridge the context, and then talk about the meaning for today. And you can see that here. Here's Ephesians 2, 1 through 10, original meaning. And it's not the most detailed, but it's certainly more detailed than, actually it's fairly detailed. Here's a lot on verse 1, verses 2 and 3. Yeah, this is pretty good verse by verse now that I look at it. So you get, and this is all kind of just talking about what's going on in the passage before it even gets to the reader. Bridging context is generally going to have to do with how do we interpret this, not just what is the interpretation, but what are some things to keep in mind as we move across 2,000 years and thousands of miles. And then contemporary significance is going to be more like something you would expect to hear from the pulpit or in a personal devotional. It's going to build on the original meaning, the bridging context, and talk about like this, for example, this text requires us to take sin more seriously than we usually do. That's an interpretation, and they've built on their exegesis to conclude that. And then, of course, we've got here talking about Vietnam War, and I mean, that's not like super modern, but you know, that still reverberates throughout history. So you're going to see those kinds of connections there. Overall, I found this a really useful series. And I know that there's just released, I don't have it yet in accordance, but there's just released the 1-volume commentary. So these are individual volumes that I've got, but the 1-volume commentary just came out. So I think it just condenses all of these. So that would even fit in the 1-volume commentary here too. So let me know if that answered your question. I'm glad you asked about that because I wanted to cover that later on anyway. So I was happy to take it now. All right, let's move on to technical commentaries. And I suppose, I mean, it's not quite a technical commentary, but it's pretty detailed. But this gets us into the world of the original language, not just the context and the meaning, but it's, I've got 5 listed here. There are more than these, but let's take the Kregel Exegetical Library just as an example. You can go back on some of these other ones and look at the recordings. I usually cover different commentaries in different versions of this particular webinar. All of that's under webinars here, but I want to talk about Kregel Exegetical Library and its commentary on the Psalms, which there are many commentaries on the Psalms, and this, in my opinion, is just one of the best. And by best, I don't necessarily mean I like it the most, although that's also true. I just mean it is thorough. You get, it really unpacks the questions that come up with translation. It even does text and textual variants. So and this is why these would be called technical commentaries. If you have a difference, for example, in manuscripts or across Hebrew, or even the Septuagint translation differs from the Hebrew in a significant way, he's going to mention that. He's got his own translation. It's all footnoted here. And in print, what you would do is go to the footnotes by, scanning your eyes down. Here, you can either scroll down, or what's even maybe easier is you can see them as hyperlinks. So in the same place where we saw the verses that were mentioned, we can hover over, and we may want to make this a little bigger down here. I'm just increasing the font. Hover over a hyperlink. So from the very beginning here in Psalm 27, and he's got these great summaries too, by the way. A prayer song of courageous trust. Hover over the one, and you'll see here of David. And he just notes the Greek text has also before he was anointed, and then the Greek is there, pra to Christenai. And the Lord is my light and my salvation. There's a note there that the Greek has savior, soter. So that's a little bit different from salvation, soteria. So those are the comments that you're going to get here. He's going to explain why he translates it different ways, but you've got his own translation here. So it starts with that. It moves to composition and context, and sometimes we get a sense of these with the Psalms, other times we don't, which in some ways I think is what makes them so universal. This could be about any time where a person was calling themselves to be patient. But sometimes with these superscriptions, we do get an indication, well, this is from David, and the Greek text gives us even a little bit more before he was anointed. And does this verse 2, for example, give us any history, any indication of when these evildoers came against him? Well, if so, It will be commented on here. We won't go through all that right now, but just so you get a sense. And then for the exegetical analysis portion, you get a summary. So this is, if the title is like a 5, 6, 7 word summary, here you get a full sentence summary. You get an outline, a detailed outline, and then you haven't even gotten to the actual commentary proper. Here it is. Following his outline now, he's going to talk in great detail about the different parts of the psalm, the different parts of the verse. He's going to give you the Hebrew wording where it's appropriate. And I'm just scrolling down kind of quickly, but you can see here, this is a much greater level of detail. And it's excellent. Even if you didn't know Hebrew, you could hover over these Hebrew characters here, and conveniently they're transliterated in the instant details. So even without knowing Hebrew, I think this is a really beneficial commentary. And then as you go on, again, this is really kind of a do-it-all commentary. I think this is like the NIV application commentaries, only I'd say even more detailed in the original exegesis, but he does talk about message and application. Dr. Alan Ross, Hebrew professor, surely with a pastor's heart. And so you'll get here, for example, a connection to Paul and Corinth and how this psalm might work with Christians in the church. So it's maybe not as specific as an application commentary, but it's included in there as well. So I think of this as maybe a little bit of a unicorn among commentaries. I think the other Kregel Exegetical Library volumes are like this too, but especially the Psalms 3-volume work. I mean, it takes up a lot of space on a physical bookshelf. But this is excellent, and I think fundamentally you could think of it as a technical commentary because of its original language exegesis, because of the translation, because of the textual variants, but it also goes pretty far with the application as well. He also does a good job, as much text as here, as much text as is here, he italicizes summary statements, puts them in bold. Accordance has brought the formatting out pretty nicely that you can just scan through if you want to see what is at play here in the commentary. So I recommend that one very highly. There are others too, if we just took a brief look, and we'll move on, but a brief look at like the NIGTC, that's the New International Greek Testament Commentary. And if you just wanted to pick a passage or a verse, you can get a sense of the scope. You're going to have headings, but here's a comment on one verse. So it's a lot longer. This might have been 15 verses in the 1-volume commentary. And you see the Greek text here. You also get it transliterated. So if the commentary itself doesn't transliterate it, like in print, it does in accordance through the instant details. Those are technical commentaries, and I know we're kind of swinging from one end to the other. Overview, and you could think in terms of what's the purpose of these 1-volume commentaries. I think they try to do a little bit of everything, but the technical commentaries, like the NIGTC, is good on application too, but the Anchor Yale ones, for example, you won't find much application there, but you will find a lot about textual variants and original languages. How did we get this book? What's the history of the manuscript transmission? Questions like that may be of great interest to you, or maybe a very little interest to you, but they are there if you want them, and you won't find this level of detail in a 1-volume commentary. I've listed some other technical commentaries here. If you've got questions or comments about these, I'd love to hear them. We could probably spend a whole webinar just on this kind of commentary, but I want to move on to Bible background commentaries, but let me check first and see if you've got questions or comments. Bible background commentary may feel like a redundant phrase. I mean, it isn't every Bible commentary giving me background, and that's true. I think especially in something like a 1-volume commentary where it's trying to do a little bit of everything. But There is a specific Bible background commentary that IVP publishes, InterVarsity Press, and Zondervan's got an illustrated one. Let me show you the IVP one, and this can be somewhat technical just because it's going to get, for example, into like the hierarchy of Greek gods or ancient Near Eastern practices, or you might see some more archaeology. So it's going to be more technical in that sense with regard to the history and the culture. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go to, I'm just going to type in the word background and even see what I have here. I may have some other stuff in here. You can see Zondervan. Let's go to the Old Testament background commentary. Let's stay in Psalm 27 where we just were. And I can get there through the content sidebar, but I can also just type in Psalm 27. And interestingly, there's very little here. And this is part and parcel of what this commentary is like. That's not a criticism. It's just to say there may not be much by way of historical background in the view of the authors that they're choosing to treat here. Or they may have addressed it elsewhere. So here in 27:4, the only thing we get, and look, there's nothing for Psalm 28, nothing for 25 and 26. The only thing we get on Psalm 27 is dwelling in the house of the Lord, and there they just take us back to their comment on 23:6. And that's going to talk about what did it mean, what was a house of the Lord, what was a temple, what was dwelling. And you can see here just by scanning through this context what this looked like historically. And so here's some meaning that might have resonated with the early prayers of this psalm that we just might miss because we're probably not thinking about Babylonian kings and gods, but they were. And so this isn't about them, but it comes in that context, and so it has a fuller meaning. So this commentary tries to bring that out. But this is specialized in the sense that, you know, so many of these psalms, we just don't know the historical background of them. And so a background commentary per se will have nothing on them, as you're seeing here. You could scroll down and see this, you know, by contrast, here's Psalm 29, where we get mighty ones, thundering voice, cedars break, mountains skip, Sirion, desert of Kadesh. Those all warrant comment here. So this will be different depending on where you are. I think you're going to find, though, with more like the Gospels, for example. Let's go to John 3. The Old Testament commentary. Let's go to the New Testament Bible background commentary, John 3. You'll tend to find more, if not verse by verse, just most verses in the passage will be treated with a narrative. There's often a phrase or a particular kind of interaction, or sometimes even a word that will be treated here that this background commentary covers. There are 2 volumes in the IVP Bible background commentary, Old Testament and New Testament. They each cover the entirety of the Testaments. And in that sense, they're like 1-volume commentaries. You could think of them as 2 1-volume commentaries, one for each testament. So yeah, you may get some detail, you may not. But if you were looking for anything remotely related to archaeology or historical background or other gods, or what does this word mean, or let's take, here's a good example. I haven't confirmed that this is in here, but I think it's a pretty safe bet. The word Leviathan. Let those curse it who curse the sea, those who are skilled to rouse up Leviathan. What or who is Leviathan? I am guessing that's going to be listed here, sure enough. Its first occurrence is in Job. You get it in the Psalms too. And then you see here in the IVP Old Testament background commentary, Leviathan appears in the Bible as a sea monster representing the forces of chaos who is defeated by God. This text requests the services of a skilled magician who would even be able to rouse a dormant Leviathan by an incantation. And you think, all right, well, that doesn't sound like a psalm, or, you know, it is an incantation spoken against in the Old Testament. Well, who's speaking here? And you can go back, and I just expanded this by all to see who's talking here. And this is Job, who is not very happy, to say the least, right here. He's cursing the day of his birth. So whether he's invoking magicians or not is not exactly his biggest priority at the moment. But when you come across a word like this, you can be pretty sure that you're going to see it in this Bible background commentary. I want to move now to more specialized commentaries, and this has to do with specific approaches to reading the Bible. And I don't necessarily mean ways of like what your view of the Bible is. I mean what lens you're using to view it. So, for example, I'll look at the ancient Christian commentary and the New Testament use of the Old Testament. Before I do that, let me just check with you and make sure we're caught up on questions. If you have any questions on the background commentaries. Talk about specialized commentaries, and this is just a small sampling of what there is in accordance. The New Testament use of the Old Testament. Now, that is very much just, it does what it says, even more so than the background commentaries. There are going to be whole passages that are not covered here, and you can see it here in the sidebar. And that's because those passages in the New Testament don't use the Old Testament, or according to the authors at least, they don't see any Old Testament usage at play. But when there is Old Testament usage, you're going to get a lot. So Mark 1, 2 through 3 begins, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah. All right, so that's pretty certain use of the Old Testament. See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. This is going to get really detailed about what's going on with this quotation. You're going to get, because this is the beginning of a book, Mark introduced. This is actually a composite citation. So you've got Isaiah 43, you've got Isaiah 43, you've got Exodus 23:20, and then there's Malachi 3:1. So there's a lot going on here, and it's going to take each of these passages and look at them in their original context. So Mark has his own purposes in mind with quoting these verses, but it can help us to know, well, what was going on in Malachi 3:1? What messenger was that talking about? Is it the same thing that Mark is going to talk about? Is Mark co-opting this in a unexpected way? Is this a way that just would have immediately clicked? What's happening in the passage? So you'll get great detail on that. I'm still just in the original use here. In fact, here's Malachi's use of Exodus and Isaiah. And then here's Malachi and Exodus and Isaiah in Judaism. So just like the NIV application commentary had, you remember it had the original meaning, it had bridging context, and then it had application. This is kind of the bridging piece. So how was Malachi 3:1 used from the time that it was written up until now, some hundreds of years later, in Mark? So you get a history of interpretation. All this stuff is hyperlinked. So if you've got any of these modules in your library, which you may or may not, but they'll show up. And then finally, Mark's use of this passage. So with the historical or with the original context in mind, what's Mark doing with this? And then the theological use. So not just the exegesis, but what are the implications here of what Mark is doing? What's the payoff? So here, for example, you get the conclusion. Christologically speaking, the striking identification of Jesus, whom Mark has just introduced, with Yahweh's coming can hardly be missed. And the next time you see the Old Testament used is in Mark 1:10, and you'll get a similar article there. Now, one cool thing about commentaries, I said we'd look at these search fields, is that you could, if you wanted to, kind of backwards, not backwards, but you could search this for Old Testament passages. So for example, here's Isaiah 64:1 in Mark 1:10. You might wonder, is that scripture passage used, or is it referenced anywhere else? In fact, I've got 49 hits. Well, that's the range, so I need to put an equal sign there. If you don't know, the way that Accordance searches, if you give it a verse just like this, it will give you that verse when it occurs in a range too, but I want that specific verse, so give it an equal sign. It's sort of like if you did a quote around a search in a search engine, make it an exact search. So 8 hits in Mark 1, 2 through 3, Mark 1, 10, and look at that, here is the reference in Mark 3, 27, and in Acts. So you could take a particular verse and see how it's used across this commentary. In fact, you could do it for a whole book. You could do the book of Psalms, 3,461 hits, not surprising because the Psalms are often quoted in the New Testament. But this is a very specialized commentary. And so anytime you have a quotation, or it may not be as explicit as Isaiah says, it may just be an allusion, it may be what's called an echo. It may be sort of a kind of a reference that you're not even sure if it's a quote. Any of that's going to be covered in here and in great detail. This commentary will not give you necessarily an original translation. It will not give you application necessarily. It won't do some of the other things that we have looked at here, because it's all about this one particular focus, which is the New Testament use of the Old Testament. And there's this other commentary, and I'll just highlight this briefly so we can stay on time here today. But the Ancient Christian Commentary is another, I'd say, specialized commentary series. This goes verse by verse, more or less. It covers the whole Bible. And it's an amalgamation of quotations of early Christian interpreters. In fact, if we can just go to the introduction to see what it covers, it's got 95 to about 749. So the first 7 or 8 centuries or so of interpretation. So if your question is, how has Psalm 27, if we go back to that, how has that been understood? Or how was it interpreted for the first 700 years of the church's history? Again, that's a very specific focus in a commentary. You will not find that in a 1-volume commentary, most likely. You might get the occasional quote of Augustine or something like that. You won't even find this in your technical commentaries. There's just no way one commentary could do everything and that you could still actually lift it up off the ground. Of course, that's less of an issue with electronic versions, but even so, commentaries need to get finished at some point, so they're going to have a focus. This one will give you the passage, and then it will go verse by verse and give you quotes from different, like here's Gregory of Nyssa, here's Cassiodorus, and I don't know who that is, so I'm going to hover over his name and see who he was when he lived, and here's his quote. Whom shall I fear means I will fear no one, for the fear of the Lord has brought him to the point that he could not fear anyone else. That comes from his explanations of the Psalms, and there's bibliographic information here. This is a great tool, and it even summarizes everything up at the top. So before you even read through these quotes, it's basically saying, here's everything in here on Psalm 27. So you might even wonder about this. David gives thanks for the fall of his adversaries. And maybe you scroll ahead to that, but you get the summary here. The hyperlinks are helpful because some of these names you will know, others you may not, but it's all linked there. And again, this is just a particular kind of commentary, and it may be exactly what you're looking for, maybe not, but Accordance has this. It has a similar one for Reformation era commentators, and there are other specialized commentaries we've got as well. But these are just 2 that I highlight, just maybe to kind of get creative juices flowing, so that you might think, is there a particular approach to reading the Bible that I want to think about? And is there a commentary for that? And you could search the store and see what's there. But these are 2 that I find myself referring to fairly regularly. Let's talk about devotional commentaries. And again, these are not meant to be rigid categories, but theology and application, this is the kind of commentary that you might sit down if you were doing some sort of personal, reading the Bible as spiritual formation, and you weren't necessarily going to do word studies. You just wanted to have a sense of, what does this mean and what does it mean for me today? The NIV application commentary definitely fits into this category. Tyndale and Bible Speaks Today are two good volumes like that. And again, this is very well titled, The Bible Speaks Today. You get a sense from the title of what that commentary is going to try to do. That's a truth claim already in the title, believing that the Bible speaks today. And so they're going to tell you what they think it's saying today, starting with some original exegesis and then moving to theology in application. I won't necessarily go through these now unless you want to see either of them or something else in particular, but I just note that like the NIV application commentary, both of these, Tyndale and Bible Speaks Today, they do tend to be more devotional than technical, but they're still pretty detailed in the exegesis. So these are pretty good all in one. I mean, again, no commentary can do everything, but these ones come pretty close. I mean, they do a lot of things. You will get historical background. You will get some word studies. You'll get some detail on each verse. You'll get some application. You'll get some archaeology. You'll get book introductions, authorship. I mean, it really covers a lot, and it does so in a pretty accessible way. So I'll just show you Tyndale briefly, which covers the whole Bible. So this is kind of like your one volume commentary, except it's multi-volume commentaries, and you know you're going to have something for every book of the Bible, but it's going to be more detail because these are individual volumes. And you could even see a page number here, page 344 at the end. So 300 pages on Joshua, just to give you a sense. And I'll just very briefly show you what a particular passage looks like, and then we'll move on. So you've got here, I mean, it is not lacking for historical background. So when we're awash in town names, here's a table. It corresponds to a map. It's going to tell us where it is, maybe where it is now. But you're not going to get very far. Well, actually, you are. In this case, you're going to get very detailed. But then, before long, you will get some comment on what might this mean today. What might be some application here. But you can see as I'm scrolling through here, the historical detail is very much present here, in part because of the kind of book that Joshua is. But this Tyndale commentary, I think, really covers a lot of territory. Let me talk about teaching and preaching commentaries. We have a few of these in accordance as well. This may feel redundant to you by the time you work through the first 5. So let's say, and you could think about this as kind of an order in which you work or bounce around, but maybe you've done your original language work on a passage, or maybe you've read it in 5 different translations and taken notes. And then maybe you go to your 1 volume commentary for the overview. Then you go for the technical commentary to get deep into the weeds. Then you do the background commentary, some of the words and place names maybe that don't make sense. Then maybe you've got your particular lenses through which you want to read the Bible and understand it. And then you want the application. By that point, you may be ready to teach and or preach. And there are commentaries that are specifically geared for teaching and preaching. One of them is called Teach the Text. Again, the title is really helpful. It tells us what this commentary is about. This is it does not cover every book of the Bible. It is published by, I want to say, Baker Academic. The last that I heard, it's just Baker Books. The last that I heard, this was discontinued. I don't know if it will be resurrected or not. So what has been published is in accordance. And if we were to go, let's see what we've got in the Old Testament here. If we were to go to Psalm 27 again, which we've looked at, here's a familiar verse. It starts with a big idea. And that big idea, this is different from the Kregel one. In Kregel, you started with a big idea in terms of what David was saying then. Here, you get a big idea that is like the preacher's big idea. Our lives, guided by a single purpose, find their security in our relationship to God. So right away, you're making an interpretive leap. Now, this is, I don't think this is exactly a controversial interpretation, but it is an interpretation because this is a teaching commentary. So you still get the understanding the text part, just like Kregel and the NIV application commentaries start with that. And you'll get some detail depending on what the commentator thinks is relevant to treat. You'll get the context, key themes, outline, little bit of history and background, interpretive insights, and this is an interesting wording. This is just meant to say we're not doing everything in depth here, but it actually, as it turns out, every verse is treated in this psalm anyway. Theological insights, and then teaching the text. So having built on all of those, and I'm going way faster than we would actually want to do this in a preaching process, but by the time you've done all that work, now it's going to fill this out with how might you preach about this in your context. It even has illustrations here, which I think any pre-written illustration, in my experience as a preacher, it's hit or miss. I've found some really useful stuff in illustrations. I think more often than not, because the preacher is in a relationship with the congregation, I think more often than not, some kind of lived experience or some shared experience between preacher and congregation, or something going on in the world, that would be more relevant. There's just no way commentaries can keep up with that. So maybe you don't go here for illustrations, or maybe you use this to kind of jog your memory. Be anchored to the Lord, talking about anchors, and maybe that thinks about a time that you were throwing down an anchor in a boat or something like that. So this can be good to use as a springboard, or even to cite these illustrations if you think they're helpful. This is more teaching oriented, but not without that original exegesis. All right, well, that's a lot. I want to talk about the info pane just to wrap up. That will kind of bring together some of what we've done. But before we do that, because we've done a little bit of comparison along the way, before we do that, let me just check in with you and see if you've got comments or questions, or especially if there's a commentary that I haven't addressed that you're curious about. I can't guarantee I will have used it, but I could at least do my best. So what comments or questions do you have on anything that we've covered? And while you think about that, or if you want to take another moment to formulate questions, let me just note here now, so that we don't miss it, there are a couple of best commentaries kinds of aggregators. One of them is bestcommentaries.com. I'll just show that to you. This site pulls together reviews from everywhere it can find reviews. And it also, oops, let me get to my web browser here. It also groups them by book. Even theologies are here. Life, it's more than just commentaries per se. Series, authors, you can search it. Featured collections, top Old Testament commentaries, and this comes from Nijay Gupta's Substack, so you could click on that and see and get a sense. This is my very first few years preaching, when I would look at a book or preach through a book for the first time. This is the first place I went, because maybe I knew what the commentaries were that were good on that book, maybe I didn't. But this one has curated lists, but also if you just go to the book list here, you'll get something like top 3 commentaries. Now, again, all subjective. They've got an algorithm that might be explained somewhere on the website. It is based on rankings from other websites, so this is not meant to be the web developer's own personal opinion so much as a collection of other reviews. So again, it's subjective, but it does give you an indication of what do people find useful. So you'll get your top 3 here. You'll see, I don't know how up to date this is, but you'll see links here. So here this shows this commentary is available in accordance, and you can usually follow these links. Yeah, I don't know how updated they are, but that will at least let you know, oh yeah, I'm going to look that up in the Accordance store, or maybe I have it in my library already. So this is a good tool. I also linked here to Accordance new releases. Let me just open that up in a web browser. So I'm just going to go to accordancebible.com, because you can see, let's see here. Here's new releases. Looks like it hasn't been updated yet to include the NIV application 1 volume commentary, but you could also find that, I think that's on sale right now. If I'm not mistaken, let me just confirm that. Oh yeah, here's the application Bible. So this is like this is what's on sale. It's the study Bible version of the NIV application Bible commentary, if that makes sense. But you can see all of it here, how it's made available in accordance. Let me just very briefly talk about, we won't go through this all, but how you would integrate everything we've looked at. Let's say you've got your cache of commentaries ready. You have a sense of what's in your library. Maybe you don't. Maybe you've been using Accordance so long you forgot what you have. That's fine too. I'm going to open up a text. We go to Revelation 1:8, or whatever your passage is. Go to Add Parallel, Info pane, and that's going to surface all of your commentaries that have something on Revelation 1:8. So here's the New Bible Commentary, my 1 volume commentary that I mentioned at the very beginning. So I might start there. I'm going to Command click this open. And as we can see here, this is just the prologue. I might get something on 1:8 itself. I might not. Looks like I don't. So I'm going to close this and go to the next one. Here's the SIL Exegetical Summary Series. Click that open. Here's NIGTC. So that's my technical commentary. Click that open. So this info pane organizes everything in my library by verse. Info for Revelation 1:8, that's the verse I'm in. It brings all these commentaries up. I just click them open, but I can also hover over them, or I can click and hold. And so here's that Bible background commentary on Revelation 1:8. As you do this, I mean, you could do this multiple commentaries at once, but you might just think about this or maybe some other schema. Maybe you want to start with the more technical stuff or the more background-oriented stuff. So you might start with SIL Exegetical Summary Series, maybe with Beale, Keener, and then as you move on, you may want to kind of scroll down and say, all right, well, I've done the background, I've done the original language stuff. Where are my application commentaries? Maybe I go to Tyndale for that, or maybe I look for Teach the Text or The Bible Speaks Today. But they're all going to be here. We've been opening them up one by one just because I want to show how to get in and out of a commentary. But once you've got a handle on what your workflow might be, and you could experiment with this, the info pane is a really efficient way to access all of your commentaries on a given passage. And then if you decide, well, I want to do that and read this commentary by itself, you could just duplicate the tab or even put it in a new zone. And you could still read it through here, but also have it open with the info pane in parallel. There's lots of options here. You can have multiple instances of the same commentary open at once, so that maybe you're using it verse by verse, but maybe you're also going back to the introduction and reading that same commentary and seeing what's going on there. We have webinars recorded on the info pane. If you go to the help menu in Accordance in webinars, you will see Eastern and Western Hemisphere. I am in the Western Hemisphere, at least last I checked. I think that's where I am. Yep, live upcoming. This is where we are right now, but everything's recorded here. So you will find info pane at least a couple times recorded here. In that webinar, we spend the whole hour looking at the info pane, which is, again, I think just probably the most efficient way to get in and out of your commentaries. But you might spend some time thinking now through whether these categories work for you, or you've got some other way of thinking about them. Just think through what's your general workflow for using commentaries. Do you find yourself gravitating to certain ones first? Are there ones that you always want to check? Is there a certain author of a certain book that is always going to be first? You just jot that down somewhere, have a sense of what that workflow is. You can even save a workspace once you get it set up in a certain way, and have that all ready to go. That's something that I'll do if I'm preaching through a book of the Bible. I'll get, by the third or fourth week of the sermon, I've pretty much of the series, I pretty much figured out my commentaries for that book, so I'll save the workspace and keep going back to it. All right, we'll stop there. I'm gonna stay on for questions, but I'm gonna end the recording. And if you're watching on the recording, again, abramkj@accordancebible.com, feel free to email me and I'll pass the handout on to you.